My God, who are you people? What do you do?
This is what we do.
Television in the early 1980s was riding high. Networks were still kings of entertainment, and shows like Dallas, MASH, and Cheers had people glued to their sets every week. But while some series became cultural juggernauts, others fizzled out before they had a chance to find an audience. 1981 in particular gave us a fascinating lineup of failures, projects that had hype, budgets, even big-name stars, yet still couldn't make it past their first year. So what went wrong? Let's take a look back at the biggest TV flops of 1981, the shows that crashed, burned, and left almost no trace in the pop culture memory bank. Mr. Merlin on CBS. Imagine pitching this. The legendary wizard Merlin. Yes, the Merlin of King Arthur's court has somehow ended up running a garage in modern-day San Francisco. That's the premise of Mr. Merlin, and if you're already raising your eyebrows, you're not alone. The show starred Barnard Hughes as the ancient sorcerer trying to live quietly in the modern world. His cover? A car mechanic. The hook was that he secretly trained a young apprentice, played by Clark Brandon, while fending off magical mishaps. On paper, it had a whimsical fish-out-of-water charm. In execution, it was clunky, awkward, and just plain weird. Audiences weren't sure what they were watching. Was it a sitcom, a fantasy adventure, a Saturday morning kids show accidentally scheduled in prime time? The special effects looked cheap, the humor was groan-worthy, and critics were merciless. One reviewer quipped it was a sitcom that asks viewers to believe Merlin fixes mufflers by day and moonlights as a part-time wizard by night. The show limped through one season before vanishing, proving that sometimes a bizarre concept is just too bizarre for TV. Best of the West from ABC. By 1981, the Western genre had mostly ridden off into the sunset. Sure, classics like Bonanza and Gunsmoke had ruled earlier decades, but by the Reagan era, audiences were chasing glitzy soaps like Dynasty and lighthearted sitcoms. Enter Best of the West, ABC's attempt to revive the Western through parody. The show starred Joel Higgins as Sam Best, a Civil War vet who becomes a sheriff in the Wild West. It leaned heavily on slapstick comedy and genre cliches, with characters like the bumbling outlaw Parker Tillman. The idea was to poke fun at the classic Western tropes audiences grew up with. But the timing was terrible. Westerns were already seen as old-fashioned, and parodying a genre that most viewers had already abandoned just didn't land. The humor felt dated, the writing uneven, and the laugh track made it all feel even cheesier. Despite some decent performances, Best of the West was canceled after one season. If anything, it showed that you can't spoof something that audiences aren't really nostalgic for anymore. Love, Sidney. Now here's one that deserves a closer look. Love, Sidney starred Tony Randall, beloved for The Odd Couple, as Sidney Shore, a middle-aged commercial artist living in New York. The premise had him sharing his apartment with a single mother and her young daughter, creating a kind of unconventional family unit. On the surface, it sounded like a typical NBC sitcom, but Love, Sidney carried a groundbreaking and controversial twist. Sidney was implied to be gay. It was the first American sitcom with a gay main character. Although the network forced the writers to keep it ambiguous, toning down or erasing references to his sexuality after pushback. That tension doomed the show. On one hand, it was praised for tackling territory no other sitcom dared approach. On the other, conservative viewers and advertisers bristled, and NBC itself seemed unsure how bold it wanted to be. Without committing fully to its progressive edge, the show got stuck in a weird limbo. Too tame for some, too daring for others. Although Love, Sidney lasted 2 seasons longer than most flops on this list, it struggled with ratings and cultural backlash, making it one of the most talked about failures of the early 80s. In hindsight, it was a brave step forward, but also a case study in how far TV networks were from truly embracing representation. Strikeforce on ABC. Sometimes even star power can't save a bad idea. Strikeforce reunited audiences with Robert Stack, the stern-faced actor famous for The Untouchables. The pitch was simple. Stack leads an elite crime-fighting squad taking down violent criminals across Los Angeles. But instead of gritty realism, what viewers got was a reheated mashup of other better shows. It borrowed heavily from Charlie's Angels with its team structure, while also trying to channel the serious tone of Stack's earlier crime dramas. The problem was that it had none of the sparkle or personality of either. Critics dismissed it as formulaic and unimaginative. Audiences seemed equally uninterested, tuning out after a few weeks. Even Stack's commanding presence couldn't elevate the wooden scripts and recycled plots. By early 1982, the strike was over. The Strikeforce, that is. The show was canned, joining the pile of forgotten action series that came and went without leaving much of a mark. Nurse. CBS. Fresh off her Emmy-winning run as Olivia Walton on The Waltons, Michael Learns stepped into another maternal role in Nurse. This medical drama followed Mary Benjamin, a widowed nurse navigating the chaos of a big city hospital. It wasn't a terrible show. In fact, Learns' performance earned her another Emmy. But as a series, Nurse struggled. The early 1980s were about to see a wave of inventive, boundary-pushing dramas like Hill Street Blues and Saint Elsewhere. Compared to them, Nurse felt staid and conventional, stuck in the sentimental mold of 1970s dramas. Viewers didn't flock to it, and the show was quietly canceled after 2 seasons. Its failure wasn't a disaster as much as it was a casualty of timing, overshadowed by fresher, bolder competitors. Darkroom. ABC. If you liked anthology shows like The Twilight Zone or Night Gallery, you might have thought Darkroom had potential. Hosted by the gravel-voiced James Coburn, it promised chilling tales of horror, suspense, and the supernatural. The problem was, it simply wasn't very good. The stories lacked the punch and creativity that made Twilight Zone timeless. Production values were low, the writing inconsistent, and the tone veered from campy to dull. Anthology shows live and die by the strength of their individual episodes, and Darkroom delivered more misses than hits. Despite Coburn's star power and the growing popularity of horror in the early 80s, Darkroom didn't last. After just 7 episodes, ABC pulled the plug. It's remembered today, if at all, as a curiosity for hardcore TV buffs. A reminder that even horror anthologies can flop spectacularly if the execution isn't there. Open All Night. Finally, we have Open All Night, a sitcom that tried to squeeze laughs out of a family running a 24-hour convenience store. The concept wasn't terrible after all. Convenience stores see all kinds of strange characters at odd hours, but the execution was uninspired. The show starred George D'Souza as the weary store owner, with Sam Whipple as his quirky son. Despite the oddball setup, the jokes rarely landed, and the series failed to find a rhythm. Critics called it flat, and audiences agreed. Like many flops of 1981, it was gone within the year. Remembered mostly for proving that even everyday settings can't guarantee relatable comedy if the writing doesn't click. The Brady Brides from NBC. Few TV families are as iconic as the Bradys, so it's no surprise NBC tried to cash in with a spin-off. The Brady Brides followed newlyweds Marcia and Jan as they moved in together with their husbands, essentially setting up a 2 couples under one roof sitcom dynamic. But lightning didn't strike twice. The charm of the original Brady Bunch didn't carry over, and the writing leaned too heavily on recycled gags. Fans expecting nostalgia got forced scenarios and awkward chemistry instead. Critics dismissed it as a cash grab, and even the most loyal Brady fans tuned out. The show was canceled after just 10 episodes, proving that even America's favorite TV family wasn't immune to flop status when poorly handled. Walking Tall. CBS. Inspired by the 1973 film of the same name, Walking Tall starred Boom Svensson as Buford Pusser, a small-town Tennessee sheriff taking on corruption and crime with his trademark big stick. The original movie was gritty and shocking, but the TV version tried to sanitize that into a network-friendly weekly drama. The result was a watered-down, formulaic crime show that never captured the intensity of its source material. Audiences didn't buy it, and critics slammed it for being repetitive and dull. Without the edge that made the film famous, the TV version collapsed quickly, becoming yet another short-lived experiment in turning movies into series. It's a Living. Here's a curious one. It's a Living debuted in 1980 but stumbled badly in 1981, canceled after just 2 seasons. The sitcom revolved around a group of waitresses working at a fancy Los Angeles restaurant, with Ann Gillian and Susan Sullivan leading the ensemble cast. The problem wasn't the concept. Workplace comedies can thrive, but the execution. The writing was shallow, relying on corny jokes and cliched character dynamics. Audiences weren't invested in the waitresses' personal dramas, and ratings sagged. Interestingly, the show got a second life in syndication years later, where it actually found an audience and ran for several more seasons. But in 1981, it was seen as a clear flop. Lewis and Clark, NBC. Not to be confused with The Explorers, this sitcom starred Gabe Kaplan as Stuart Lewis, a guy who moves to a small Nebraska town to open a general store. That's it. That was the premise. The show leaned on Kaplan's charm, but the plots were thin, and the humor non-existent. Critics complained it felt like a one-joke show stretched to 30 minutes. Audiences quickly tuned out, and the series was canceled after only a handful of episodes. Even Kaplan's popularity couldn't rescue this one. Lewis and Clark stands as one of the more forgettable entries in 1981's flop parade. Those Amazing Animals. In a year full of odd concepts, this one may take the cake. Those Amazing Animals was a family-friendly variety show hosted by country singer Jim Stafford. It combined comedy skits, musical numbers, and animal segments, yes, real animals, into a strange hybrid of entertainment and education. The idea was to appeal to kids and parents alike, but in practice it pleased no one. The comedy was hokey, the animal bits felt tacked on, and the pacing was all over the place. It never found a consistent audience, and was yanked after a brief run. It's mostly forgotten today, except as an example of how networks sometimes threw anything at the wall in hopes of sticking. Looking back, 1981 was a fascinating year for television. Networks were experimenting, throwing unusual premises and star-driven projects at audiences, hoping to strike gold. Sometimes the risks paid off, but more often they didn't. From Merlin running a garage, to Robert Stack fighting crime with a second-rate task force, and from Brady nostalgia to Jim Stafford's animal antics, the failures of 1981 remind us that TV success is never guaranteed. A show can have name recognition, a fresh idea, or even a groundbreaking premise, and still collapse under the weight of poor execution or bad timing. And maybe that's part of what makes television history so interesting. The flops are just as revealing as the hits, showing us not only what audiences loved but what they were ready to reject.